We go. Hey guys, what's going on? Memes here. And I'm joined this evening by my co-host Jen. Say hi to the good folks, Jen.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Looking forward to our discussion this evening.
Alrighty. So, we have a few folks in the chat. I see Tom has joined us from the Guinea Pig Collective. Oh my god, people are actually watching. That is fascinating. But it's okay, it's okay. A lot of this is personally my digital crisis diary of what the heck is going on in this dude on the internet's life and just trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Speaking of what might or might not be going on, reality. It seems pretty real. At least more real than me with this imaginary green screen that isn't actually behind me as my bandana. Wow, it actually gives me scales. I kind of like that. But what I'm trying to communicate is we see a world. Okay. We tend to believe that we live in about three plus one dimensions and stuff like that. It's kind of 3D to our perception. And we seem to be cruising through a thing that we call time. Now, what might actually be going on? That can be a very deep question, depending on how deep one wants to delve. We're going to delve into the realm of logic today. Why? Because we can, and Jennifer is the only actual prepared person here. So, that's what we got going. Nerdy! What's going on? Yes, people and rodentia as well. I watched Night of the Lepus. I ain't going around to irk any of y'all, even though you have a pickled form as well. Jax, what's going on, my dude? What's going on? Up cycle. Yes, yes. We are continuing. Bicycles absolutely fascinate me. I never really understood how they work. I'm like, how can it do this? They go through the different gears. It's clicking. It's doing different things. Ratio. Thank you for being here. You just neurons fired in a particular way. Thank you. But yeah, we got a lot of stuff going on. So we're going to be talking logic. And Jennifer had some syllogisms, if you would. Okay, folks, we're not going to scare you with the maths. Not yet. We're going to be explaining things in the most logical way we can. So maybe Sally, Dick, or Jane can
We're
be
actually
like,
not going to be explaining things in the most logical way we can. We're going to be explaining them in the most intuitive way we can. We're explaining logic, but we want it to be intuitive. And the only way for that to happen is for us to actually be able to think about what every single proposition means
this
and
is why
what
this
it
is why Jen
means.
is here
What
because
it means.
go on. No,
Go
no, I
ahead.
used the word logic twice in the sentence. That doesn't work. You're not allowed to do that. Thank you for catching me.
No, it's all right. I think a lot of people will say that it's good to present things logically, but I don't see it that way. I think this is very hard to learn. It does have logic in it, but it has more than logic. So to say that it's logical might not be accurate, but once you understand even a little bit of it, you can apply it, which is the fun part. So I try to get people ready to apply it as quickly as possible if they want to, and that involves understanding a thought process. So most people do not actually have a philosophically apt thought process. What they have is a emotionally selected, memorized thought process. So reasoning is basically,
As Tommy highlights down below with the platter.
I was just going to say,
I
reasoning is basically emotionally navigating memories. And the aggregate of that is going to be the motivation for individual choice events. Now, that's all fine and good for normal existence. It doesn't, kill you to live that way. That's just the lowest energy solution, is just the
it
trivial
sometimes
solution.
does, but
The trivial solution that accounts for all the observed facts, if you want to call them that. So we're basically looking at a situation where when you bring people into philosophy, you have to say, like, well, the way that what you think is thinking right now is not actually what we call thinking in philosophy. That doesn't mean you're dumb. It doesn't mean you don't have access to reason and the ability to make deductions. It just means that reasoning philosophically is a more integral process. And understanding and getting in touch with that integral process, having access to that integral process, necessitates knowing what it means to think philosophically, which is less about a memorized emotional inclination and more about visualizing a process. Okay, so what does it mean to visualize a process? Well, that's something a lot of people struggle with because some people can't visualize anything at all. So visualizing a process is where we come in with stuff like math, which basically serves as a crutch, not in a bad way. We need crutches because we have limitations cognitively. A crutch to help us understand
Training
an
wheels.
abstract concept.
Training wheels. Yeah.
Basically, like we're not against crutches in this system, because everything is just basically about the result, which is eventually enlightenment. But prior to enlightenment, you get all these other benefits, and you don't need to be looking for enlightenment to use the system, because you just have to basically agree with the premise that computational simplicity, aka parsimony, is a valuable or virtuous thing. Hey, Ariel Suarez, haven't seen you in a while, buddy. Nice to see you. Everyone else in the chat, hi, thanks for joining. This is probably one of my, I don't know if it's my favorite topic, but it's probably my favorite way to talk about a topic. And
Oh,
I don't
thank
know
you.
if I don't know if I have a favorite topic, but I like to talk about the topics that people are interested in more so than my own personal interests, because they tend to be a bit obscure. So this is basically my favorite kind of combo, because we actually get to go in and say, hey, like pop up the hood and really start from what they call first principles. And if you have no idea what that means, well, buckle up, because you're about to. Are you able to share the document memes? Because if I try to share this document, my computer's
I
probably
got
going
it.
to
No,
have a
I
problem.
got you. I got you. All right, I have them up. Number one, justifying dogma. Here we go.
Okay, so this is one where a lot of people struggle. Okay, so I'm trying to think. Do I have the one in there about circular definitions? Yeah, I do. Can you scroll down a bit?
Okay.
I want to start in an easier to understand thing. Okay, so we're looking at using terms in a very specific way. So I'm not saying everybody has to use these terms for all time. Just keep going, memes. I'm saying that if what I'm saying is gonna make sense, you have to use my definitions. So stop here and stop. Just go to where definitions are trivially circular. It's the yeah. So this is proof
Gotcha.
2. I wanted to start here. I want to start with a relatively simple proof, because once you get to a lot of premises, then it gets complicated. But basically, these are set up this way so that if you have an issue with one of the steps, you can stop at that step and either talk to me about it or talk to yourself about it. Basically, try to figure out if you agree with it, if it's something you are able to think, is something you want to think, and if it's a way that you want to understand stuff. Hi, T Carr. Nice to see you. Appreciate you being here. So we're going to start with P1. Is that okay, memes?
Go for it.
A definition is trivially circular when a category is defined in terms of the same category. Okay, so this is my definition. So basically what it's saying is if we're confined to a category, we can't say things outside of that category. Now, if you don't understand this, I'll say a counterexample of this to make it make more sense is that the power of math combined with physics is that we aren't defining these two things in terms of the exact same category. One is numerical abstraction. The other one is the measurement of amounts. And the idea is that there is a map between those things that is coherent somehow to us, or rather an intelligible map for us to leverage the fact that these categories aren't the same. So even if we F that up hardcore, we still get to hella benefits from having leveraged two disciplines that didn't have the exact same category. Did that make sense, memes?
Say that last two sentences again, if you could.
We get more out of using math plus physics, even if we don't understand ontology, because math and physics are different domains conceptually and computationally.
I'm all right with that.
Okay, another counter example of that is religion. How do you verify the claims of religion? You can't, because if religion defines the scope of truth, there's nothing extra religious to verify the claims of the religious truth. Does that make sense? That's the alternative to math physics.
See, this is where it's okay. I'm gonna get myself into a lot of trouble
Okay,
here.
if there's only one religion in the world, imagine this. There's only one religion in the world. All the claims that get made, and everyone's religious, okay? All the claims that get made are circular within that religion. Do you agree with that?
This is also where I get myself in trouble. On what level of
I don't.
analysis are we
It's
talking
fine if
at?
you don't agree. It's fine if you don't agree. You're entitled to disagree. I'm just saying that you have to agree to be able to follow along with this train of thought.
Oh, I'm happy to agree for just to go along and every. My thing is I thought like a lot of religion and stuff was like there ended up always being just an article of faith. Like there was a belief that may not be
Let's assume
provable.
religions are making truth claims, but that those truth claims are based
Oh,
on faith. Okay. And that maybe atheists don't accept faith as a justification, but we'll just say that the theists do. But in my thought experiment, there's only one religion and everyone believes in it. This is this is not expected to have correspondence to reality as a metaphor. Do you see how all the claims made by those people, unless they were lying, would be circular within the claims of that religion?
can we use just a system of logic instead? Is that
Well, no, we're defining logic here. So we're defining what it means for something to be circular. And all it means for something to be circular is that the categoricals of the domain and the codomain are the same. So in math, it's circular because the domain is numbers and the codomain is also numbers. So math can't say
hmm.
anything outside numbers. That's the type of circularity I'm talking about.
I don't know if I'm qualified to make that.
You don't have to
I'll
make an
go. I'll roll
absolute
with it.
decision. It's just part of the it's part of the proof. It's a conditional assumption that is I consider necessary
It sounds like you're
for
defining
explain.
domains. You're
Yeah,
defining domains and what might be within those domains or what might be outside those domains. Okay.
sure. So if words map to words, then it's circular within words. So that's what's
Okay.
important here. That doesn't mean that words can't say anything. It just means that what they can say is restricted to the structure of words.
May I steal, woman, your proof?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay. What you're kind of trying to avoid is what a lot of folks like me do is like you'll just say something and then I'll take a random arbitrary tangent upon a tangent of that definition, start talking about it. And some folks' minds will like be like, it will resonate a little bit. Other folks will get really confused. And then if you keep having the conversation, you kind of just draw folks into that domain. So it's kind of a method of completely derailing a conversation. You're trying to avoid what happens on the internet a lot and in real life a lot. And it's just humanity a lot. No, you're being very specific and you're touching upon things that that's how it resonated with me. I'm not sure if that's how you meant it to be, but that seems to okay. I can drive.
No, I don't think that you were doing that. And if you were doing that, you're not doing it more than most people do. Most people will try to undermine the weakest point in your argument. So they'll ask for, traditional Socratic troll would ask for a definition of, well, it would be hard because everything is basically defined here, but they would try to attack what they perceived as the weakest part. Now, why is that problematic? You don't know if it's actually a weakness or a necessary component of something, and if you have to go for the weak parts,
At
it's
that
not
point, like,
actually
are you?
necessarily a
Yeah,
good
you're.
critique. You should be critiquing the central premise of an argument. You should be critiquing the conclusion, and you should be critiquing it with your own argument. You shouldn't be, I'm not saying this to you, memes, I'm saying this in general. You should be taking an argument as a single thing, even though it has parts, and that fine, you can take issue with one of the parts and attempt to disprove one of the parts, but your disproof is going to have its own presuppositions that can then be dismissed on various grounds. So I think the strongest thing, if you want to respond, actually take issue with this, which I don't think is a good idea because you don't even know what it's being applied for yet. Not talking about you memes again, is to object to the conclusion and then try to write your own proof that concludes the opposite of what I concluded. And then if your presuppositions are stronger, and there's maybe different ways to justify the strength of a presupposition. Like for me, the most important thing is ultimately leads to enlightenment. But the second most important thing is should be understandable. So we're looking at stuff that is really obscure and abstract, but also that is being presented in a way that is intended to be intuitively graspable. But unless you already have a familiarity with thinking this way, and you might, and you just might not know it, this might not make a lot of sense. And it's good to stop where it doesn't. But just looking for a weakness because you double extrapolated a potential contradiction in an assertion based on a technicality about a definition, that's not what that's not really going to work here, because the proof is asserting a definition. So the idea is that if you want this conclusion, then you take these definitions. So the way to read my proofs is start at the conclusion. If you like it, then see what you need to do to bring that into being. Or you could also just use the way that people allegedly make up their minds, pro tip it's not, and just go through the premises. And then if you fail to disprove them, accept them on that basis of whatever your basis of accepting premises is, and go from there.
I mean, personally, I am totally biased on this because this is a kind of a lesson that I partially learned back in, like, I think the seventh or eighth grade. Because I sat down, I think it was like a strategy or like some. It was one of those things where, like, well, nobody thinks it's important, but they had us do like this crossword puzzle, and it was kind of like you fill in all these answers and you go across and everything. And the very first direction says, read all instructions. So, like most folk, I glanced real quick and then I started at instruction number one. And you get down to like instruction like 38 or something like that at the end, you're like, yeah, disregard instruction one. Or like something like this. And it like throws everything off. So I kind of like how we're like starting at the end there because it resonates with me there. Um, the other thing too is like, see, I never really understood that because like I see a lot of folks like arguing about it. It's like, well, look at this case. Look at this. So you're going for the lowest hanging fruit on a tree. If you're saying that tree is wrong and you're just picking up the fruit that's basically already falling or basically like the branch is coming to the ground, like, what are you actually doing? It's like, if you're trying to defeat somebody's argument, if you believe that they are wrong, and some folks will take it so far as to say those people are evil. And I'm like, okay, so are you attacking the core of their argument, or are you just attacking something on the periphery that a lot of folks basically like? If is that what most folks there really care about? Are you actually attacking like the true part of their argument? Because of course, like if you're attacking any core or something like that, even like boxing or stuff like that, yeah, it can be hard to go for the core. People defend themselves and everything, and people are probably more staunch in their arguments. They probably have more experience with that as well. Occasionally, yeah, there might be some flaws in some of the logic. It's just a lot of folks, they just always seem to be going for the low hanging fruit rather than like trying to like maybe correct an error on each other's part there. Just my 2 cents.
Well, no, because correcting an error, if you actually understood what the things were saying, you'd realize that there's no error to be corrected, because the only way to disagree essentially is to say that it doesn't seem that that's right, which is fine in my worldview, because you're entitled to your autonomy. Like, you're not, there's no, like, we're not trying to compel people to agree with us.
I agree.
So the idea is that it's like with math. You can read a math textbook and let's say everything in it's right, and then you say, fuck that shit, I don't want to learn this, I would rather play video games for whatever. It's
I'm
basically
gonna send
something
you a
like that.
link, Kali, in case you have time to come on, because I know Kali had some stuff she needed to do.
Yeah, so you want to go back
Continue.
up to proof one.
Yep.
All right, so when I'm talking about circularity, I'm not talking about P1, therefore P1. Okay, that's what you might call explicit circularity. So the logic buffs are going to say, you're raping the definition of circularity, fuck you. I'm not listening to your shit. So that would be, I would say, a fallacy, because I am speaking of that exact same type of thing, except that it's non-linguistic, right? So if I'm explicitly saying P1, therefore P1, think about what's the analogy to that from the computational equivalent of my conceptualization of something. And this is where I bring in this idea of words defining words, meaning that it's circular, and that that's something that is really important to acknowledge because it doesn't seem that way. It seems like if we had a dictionary, we could learn things. If we only had a dictionary, in other words. So that's kind of a separate question, and that's not the way we want to look at it. So this first proof is how I'm trying to show you how to look at stuff. So this isn't meant to be something that's just going to fit perfectly in with conventional language. This is meant to be something that's going to help the use of conventional language make a lot more sense. It's going to make stuff stop being confusing. It's going to put you in the driver's seat of your understanding. All right, so P1, what do you think about P1?
Your definition determines a concept.
Okay, so did I not just contradict that? Ha ha ha. I mean, I feel like someone listening to me so far would say that this P1 actually contradicts the sentiment of what I've conveyed thus far.
Oh my
I don't know if you'd agree
gosh.
with. I am basically at the point of agreeing with myself here, so I don't know if that's something you wanted to mention or
No,
if
no,
you
no,
just
no,
want to
no,
say yes,
no,
I'm cool.
Jen, this is huge. This is huge. I remember Jen from a couple of years ago, and you're basically saying the same thing. The method you're going about it is wow. I'm just noticing right here. I'm like, there aren't periods here.
There are
Whoa.
periods, but I think
Oh
that
no!
actually, you
Oh,
know what I
okay, yeah.
think? You know what I think that if putting two periods, first of all, I always forget to put periods, and then I hate that I've made these mistakes, so I figure just no periods.
People get offended at periods, apparently.
But I think it's actually a bit easier on GPT because the double period per line might confuse it. Because you got to
Hmm.
remember that GPT thinks a certain way. It only thinks context
When
relationally.
I
So if
literally
I
try to do,
deviate from the
yeah,
context relational structure in any way, and I figure
yes,
that
yes.
one period per line is less of a deviation, it's going to have less artifact um, bad information. Because what you want to
Wh-
minimize is the bad information going into your model. You want
when I
to
link,
maximize
yes,
good
yes.
information.
What, yeah, what I do, I try to use the same coherent structure. Can you please help me? Or just you put a comma. Here's a quotation. Here's either my website. Here's the code I'm working with. Make sure there's another space between it, and then start on a fresh line and like keep doing those transitions. And it does a fantastic job. It's all right, cool. But hey, oh, yes, yes. There's all different. Yes. Well, this reminds me kind of like the whole Vsauce video about the whole Barnard Tarski like paradox or technically theorem or something like that, where it's like, all right, at one point he's giving the example. It's like, what if you had a Webster, a hyper Webster? It has all possible combinations of letters, words, and just every single thing that could be spoken, this, that, yeah. But then there's ways you can kind of like computationally reduce it. It's like, well, once you have this category, just have this volume, everything that begins with A, and all the combinations are there, and then you go through there, and you're like, wait, so you're able to reduce this? It's like, huh, that's it was very interesting. But well,
Yeah, so if you're having trouble restricting yourself to words, that's actually a good thing because a lot of people have trouble thinking outside words, and that's actually the problem. So if someone has trouble with that, we got to sort of start in a different place to get them just to be able to value thinking abstractly. So if you're already so abstract that you're having trouble limiting it to words, you're actually in a much better place. All you need now is to have a structure imposed on that
I
potential
knew when
to be
people
able to put
couldn't.
it. Then you once you have the structure, you can put it into words because once you have the structure,
Hmm.
you have the logic. Once you have the logic, you have the context relations. Once you have the context relations, you can put it into language. But it's okay to be missing context relations because like, why would you have context relations for divine knowledge? It's okay to be missing those. And once you understand you're missing them and that you can build them up, well, you're on the way. Jack's Law says, I'm trying to make others come to my perspective. It's more I'm trying to explain my perspective. And yeah, obviously I'd be happy if people came to it, but I don't like the idea of like forcing people to do stuff. So I'm trying to present it in a way that, if all the intellectuals agree with this, are you going to be
Everyone
forced
loves
to
to buy.
are you going to
Nobody
be
likes
forced
to be sold.
are you going to be forced to agree with something that all the intellectuals agree with? So in a way, no, and in a way, yes. And we see the precedent with that with language, with mathematical systems and theological systems. So I have a confidence that intellectuals will accept this because of the strength of the logic, but I also don't want people to feel that if their own logic deviates from this, that there's something wrong with them or that they should change, because that would be a violation of my principles, which is minimizing the harm. And I think making people feel bad about themselves is very harmful and creates a lot of neurotic tendencies that makes it really hard to think. So when we do this philosophy, there's a strong component placed on physical health and mental health.
Wow.
So P1 is something that I've argued against before. I've argued that definitions, because they have words, don't determine concepts. So why would I now contradict myself? Is, oh my gosh, have I undermined my own purpose? Well, no, because it's a fucking model. And it's extremely, can you agree that it would be useful if definitions did determine concepts?
Well, my thing is, I read that and I read a definition determines a concept, and then I immediately just reorganize it. A concept determines a definition, and I'm like,
Well,
I
that's
don't
the
know. It
true,
kind of
that's the true one. The concept does
well, it
determine the definition because the concept determines everything, because the concept is the irreducible component of mind, and the irreducible component of the thing that is the primary cause determines everything. So that's actually backwards from reality. So I'll bite that bullet. And I'll say, well, sometimes we have to backwards from reality our models, because backwards from reality ends up being uh, more coherent than other approaches, and possibly the only coherent approach, because backwards from reality is still computationally connected to reality.
I, I'm trying to figure out if this is circular, if it's parabolic, if it's hyperbolic. I'm just trying to know because it's going there, but it is defining. It's doing something. It's doing something. I like it. And Eric, I'm sorry, we ate the nachos earlier. If you come out to Utah, I will get you nachos. So, but yeah, no, it's well, this is the thing. I've been tracing out all these different trig functions and these different things. I found an error on Math World. Like, how much of a nerd am I when I'm looking at like a friggin' a summation that converges to the volume with a hyperbolic figure eight knot? I'm plugging in. I'm like, wait a second. That's not this. Wait, this should be squared, not cubed. Boom! Oh, nailed it! I'm like, now I have an excuse to send them an email. You have this wrong, and it was on Math World too. So I'm like, these are the little things in life that keep me going. But yes, it will technically
All right,
change
so
the
now
math.
now that we've accepted that number one contradicts reality, can we go on?
Please.
Have I like satisfied you that we can actually use this premise and that it's fine, and that using this premise means that the entire argument is a model, because we can disprove the first premise with the underlying premise of the worldview, which is that the mind is the first cause.
Jennifer, you have no idea how proud I am of you right now. I
Okay.
continue. I'm gonna go make myself another coffee. I'll be right back.
Okay, so I'll just go on to the next one. Hey, David, and nice to see you. Thanks for coming over.
Hey,
If
David.
anyone has questions about what we've talked about so far, please, and or anything on the screen, just throw them in the chat, and I'll explain if I can. And I know there might have been some questions before that I missed, because I was sometimes, if I get really engrossed in the conversation, it's not possible to read anything, because I'm so
Unless you have
all
limited
of my mental
computation.
all of my mental ability is absorbed in visualizing the thing I'm describing. So if I'm visualizing it and I'm describing it, I'm going to have to go around the object that I'm visualizing to find its different parts, to find the logic to transfer it into language to explain what I'm saying.
I think you just explained my ADD.
So
Continue, please.
P2, we've
Yeah.
got the concept. So P1, the reason we're asserting P1 and then justifying it conditionally on it being a model is that it actually, I think it seems this way. Because when you look up a word in a dictionary and you don't know what it is, you're trying to determine its concept, I'm saying. And so when you seek out a definition in a dictionary, you're presupposing that this definition will determine the concept. But then we just basically said, well, that's actually not going to happen because concepts are not going to be circular within language because language can't make extra linguistic determinations. And the majority of what we care about, though it can be represented linguistically, doesn't really concern linguistic representation. It concerns the completion of processes, and namely the manner in which processes are completed, properties that we may ascribe to that, such as efficiency, grace, and so forth. So the idea is that even though this isn't true and we can prove that it isn't true, if we assert that it's true, it's an awesome model. And then we don't have to worry about the model breaking down because we already know what the limit of the model is. It's when a definition no longer determines a concept. That will be the limit of the model. So basically what I'm saying is that you can model physics like this. You can model physics such that its definitions determine its concepts because there's sufficient like context vis-a-vis the empirical instrumentation that we have, that structure can give us what amounts to an ontology, thereby making it possible to state attributes about the ontology in the definition, which will then determine particular concepts. So broader picture, if there's no structure, concepts determine definitions because concepts determine everything. We don't really worry about that particular pathway, but then we say, okay, we reverse reality, we get a kick-ass model. So then we say, well, what if a definition did determine a concept? Okay, well, that's only possible when we can lean on a pre-existing, which you might call ontological structure, but it's not actually an ontological structure. It is a feature of the of the relational properties that are intrinsic to measurement that bring about things like the periodic table, which appears to be structure. And because it appears to be structure, but it's also a verifiable appearance, i.e. like we can have the Gibbs free energy and that means something, we've got enough to load the information into the definition such that it will determine something like a concept. So I totally acknowledge this is abstract. However, if you don't understand this stuff, you're going to have a lot of trouble with the subsequent logic because some logic is conceptual and some logic is procedural. And so we must be talking about conceptual logic right now because we've used a first premise that can be contradicted by procedural logic, which is the mind determines everything. That's procedural because it doesn't enter into our conceptualization. It's considered to be something that brings about our conceptualizations.
I'm just a little creeped out. I'm like, how did Jen get into my head? I feel like you just like metaphorically like opened my head and just took like an ice cream scoop out and be like, okay, how do I make these words better? I'm like, because I'm like, wow, this kind of. I feel like that's what my mind does. Because like I'll go from like one end, I'm like, all right, well, I disagree with this. Why? All of these reasons. I'm like, wait. What was the other perspective of this? And does it swing all the way over? Not always, but occasionally it's really creepy. But it's if you're going to analyze all the potential perspectives and everything there, and then it's like you said, it's like we have enough data to begin to. The thing that I took away from something information theory was the message has to have meaning, or the message has meaning. Now, the accuracy of that actual
The
meaning.
meaning is
Hmm,
being imbued at some point. Might be a more accurate way to say
okay,
it.
okay, yeah, cool.
But yeah,
So
sorry,
that.
continue with what you were saying.
Oh no! I was just I like it. I like it, and just even looking at just the initial glances, I'm like, oh my god, this doesn't scare everyone away. But then again, like it's gonna resonate with different people in different ways. And I feel like it's one of those things where the
Well,
more you think about it,
they're not necessarily gonna think it when they read it. So they're not gonna have the transformative experience of thinking it while they read it. Because when you think it while you read it, you can see what it means, and you can see that it's a new meaning than something you've had prior, and then you get but you also see how it links up to what you've already known. So
Mhm.
someone in the chat was asking, do you think this way of thinking is where we start as the robots we are? No, I think you already have integral processing. What you don't have is how to access all of that integral processing voluntarily.
Mm.
So I think at the very foundational level of your being, there's nothing wrong with your thought. But that at the more gross levels of your being where you're not aware of everything that's going on, it's easy to, first of all, become obsessed with things that don't have to do with anything that's immediately going on, which impedes you from understanding what's immediately going on. And also, if you're interested in philosophy, you will impose your own logic onto your understanding, which will then become embedded in your subsequent understanding. So you'll have a thought, you'll have a way of thinking, but it'll have an intrinsic flaw in the conclusions that it draws. So the problem isn't that you are employing a logic with a structure. The problem is that there's some problem in that structure. So once you see what the problem is in the structure through insight, you just alter one facet of the structure of something you were already doing. So the
You have
idea
thought
is
this through. I like it. Sorry.
thanks. You have the power to do what I'm doing right now. And the way you access that power is through thought. And you have to learn how to think philosophically, which involves, it doesn't involve actively accessing memory. It involves visualizing and then zooming in on different parts of the visualization. So you're
Nice.
already doing that trivially because visualizing stuff and localizing parts of that visualization is how your cognition works. You just aren't aware of how your cognition works. And this doesn't make you aware of how your cognition works because how your cognition works is what brings you about and it's circular within that, but it allows you to leverage how your cognition works for the purposes of epistemology, which is what we consider sufficient for philosophy. And you'll see that other philosophical systems have different like necessary conditions for what they consider philosophy. So this is another place where people tend to disagree with me. Hi, Sonic Gravity. Nice to see you. And
Hi,
Hey,
welcome
Brad.
to the show.
hey.
We're just talking logic in ways that some may view as illogical.
That's awesome. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Right on. I'm just learning. I'm just reading. Let me catch up.
Oh, if you want to catch up, we need to start from the end. Where is it? Yes, where definitions are necessarily trivially circular. So something something circle, cool. And to summarize what I took away from Jen is everyone loves to buy, nobody likes to be sold.
Well, that was one aspect of like a lot of times when people make proofs, the idea is that they're trying to compel people to their worldview. And I just want to make it clear that I'm not trying to do that, and that I see proofs as basically the point of a proof is to convince yourself of how right you are. So it's basically a self-congratulatory act, and that's considered to be an important part of philosophy because it makes you feel good, and feeling good is part of minimizing suffering.
There we go.
So if you want to follow along and you accept the premises, like I'm not going to hold you to those in perpetuity or anything, and it's really just for the purposes of the argument because what I'm trying to show here is how I think.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're
Be-
channeling my podcast. Like that's 100% exactly my, direction I'd say, hey, look, you listen to my podcast, you orbit my sonic gravity, you're going to view the universe through the eyes of a madman. And I'm not trying to change your mind. I like you just the way you are. If you ever listen to my podcast, it's because you're interested in knowing what I think. And it has nothing to do with telling somebody they're wrong or anything like that. 100%. 100%. I told Jen, I'm with you all the way.
Oh,
Thanks. So where we were so far is that I began with a simpler proof, which was actually the second proof in this document, which established my definition of circularity. So it said that since words define words, definitions are circular because what it means to be circular is that the domain is the same category as the codomain. So in this case, the domain is words, and the codomain is also words. So if you look up a definition, it's in words. So this is not the logic definition of circularity, which is, are you familiar with logic at all?
Once upon a time, I was a computer science major. There's lots of logic there, mostly symbolic logic, but
yeah, it's mostly association of symbols to particular computer processes. So that helps a bit. So circular in terms of formal logic has its own like set of jargon and handshakes, but if you're already familiar with computers, you'll understand it. So the circular definition of logic is, the definition of circularity in logic is P, therefore P.
I mean, that reminds me of banter I'd have like back when I played World of Warcraft. It's like you're a this, no, you're a this, I'll this you. I'm like that. That was just.
Well, I would call that explicit circularity, and I don't think anyone's really going to make a mistake like that, because explicit circularity is just so obviously fallacious that it almost doesn't even warrant being classified as anything but in a theoretical error. Like I've never seen a proof that goes P, therefore P.
I'm not saying it's a proof. I just feel like it's something that humans do occasionally.
But if I say words, therefore words, how is that not circular? And that is, I mean, technically I'm nailing the logic definition of it. So definitions, since they're words and they are of words, then they're circular within words. Now, in my thing, circularity is actually not a problem. It's just something that if you don't acknowledge that it's there, it's a problem. So we obviously things can't be circular outside of consciousness because consciousness is where my system stops. So it is circular within consciousness, but we consider that to be okay because we consider consciousness to be the irreducible, both physical and metaphysical process. So then I come on to this one, which is the more important.
That's a strong assertion. I tend to think Brad probably agrees with that based upon what I've listened to. I'm open.
I don't know. I mean, I think we got to let her go to, you know what I mean? I think if you really seek to understand what somebody's saying, you got to, listen to what they have to say, like all the way. And then you can't just like challenge everything when they hit something that you may or may not agree with. Like you got to let them get it out, right? And then you can test whatever it is they're saying according to their own terms. And if it's internally consistent, then it might make sense. You know what I mean? But you got to let it run,
Thank you, Brad. This is why you are here. This is what I admire about you, man. Because you caught me doing my own flaw right there. I'm like, oh, is there a person out? Here I am cutting Jen off when she's in the middle. I'm going to go grab my coffee. Continue, Jen.
Okay, so we've got P1, a definition determines a concept. So I was spending a bit of time explaining why this isn't actually true. The reverse is true. A concept determines a definition. And that's the reason for that is technical because the mind determines everything. The mind determines concepts, and therefore concepts determine everything else, including definitions. So the idea is, wouldn't it be useful if definitions did determine concepts? So we put that in as a premise, even though there's sort of an asterisk beside the premise that it's not a universal truth. It's a model that, gee, wouldn't it be awesome if this could be the case? So P2 is the conceptual range of a word is either reducible or irreducible. So this is where this is one of the big problems I have with explaining things to people when they just want to go through definitions and regress through definitions. So the idea here is getting at something called primitivity, which is irreducibility. So we can either reduce or not reduce the conceptual range of a word, and if it can't be reduced anymore, then it's encompassing as much as it can, and it's called irreducible. And at this point, if something's encompassing as much as it can, it's going to be very vague, and for that reason, it's going to be called a primitive notion. So there's two different kinds of words. They're either reducible or irreducible, in which case they're derivative or primitive correspondingly.
Can you give me an example of a reducible and an irreducible word? Just so I...
All right, reducible. Chair. Chair. A chair can be reduced to
a stool,
an object whose primary function is sitting.
So a chair is reducible.
That's right, because I've reduced it to something that is more general than simply chair, because my description includes more than just chairs, doesn't it?
Because a rock...
Beanbags.
But it could be a definition of a chair. Because you could say, well, if its primary purpose is sitting, then that's what makes it a chair. So then we want to say, can we reduce that more? Is sitting reducible? You think you can reduce sitting?
Might be able to reduce a relative angle by leaning, but sitting seems to be a concept.
I hope you're not saying sitting is irreducible. You can't reduce it to a physical process?
Just still?
It would be bending the body in half for the purposes of resting the lower half of the body. All right, so notice how we've done two reductions here, and we're related to chair, but we're a little farther away from chair.
Okay.
So what's the next question?
What's irreducible? Can you give me an example of something that's irreducible?
Well, we got to just keep going on this, right?
Oh, okay.
Do you accept the definition that sitting is folding the middle of the body in order to rest the lower part of the body?
I think it can be. Sure.
It can be.
Well, let's accept that. Let's accept that definition for the purposes of this, because I don't want to go into a super.
No. I understand.
I feel like the audience is going to be like, okay,
the simplest function, because we're going to go on forever.
Yeah, okay. No, I mean, I'm just the reason I ask is because
you're right. We should
irreducible. I want to make sure I know what you mean, because I'm not sure.
So do you see that we have given two examples of reducible concepts, be they chair and be they sitting?
Mm-hmm.
You accept that? Okay, so now what concept are we at? We're at body. Can we reduce body?
Form.
You have to explain how. We see that's just another word that doesn't actually reduce it.
I don't know if it actually reduces. That's my best bet.
There you go. We found an irreducible word.
Yeah.
So you could say that a body is an amount of matter, but you lose something.
Yeah. Body, I guess so. A word is, if a word was a shape, right, then it's irreducible if the shape of the word matches exactly the shape of whatever it describes. And it can't be
that's
nothing gets in, nothing gets out.
Yeah, I think that's
it's like body.
that sort of implies that there is a perfect correspondence, but there isn't. There's a optimized correspondence, and there isn't an absolute correspondence because there's nothing for it to correspond to. So in a way, yes, but at the limit, it's not the act. It doesn't reach the limit.
If that was my understanding, is that good enough to continue?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it's just really important to, if anything doesn't make sense, say it as soon as possible, and that there's no dumb questions, because everything, it's like a machine. People. Well, it's like a machine. If one part of the machine is put in backwards or isn't put in at all, the machine just will either work incorrectly or won't work.
Sure. Okay. Yep. No,
so,
I got you. I'm with you.
How do we feel about irreducible versus reducible? That hypothetically, if we had this like godlike definition, we might be able to reduce the concept of a body. But for now, given what we have access to, we're fine to just say body's an example of something that appears to be irreducible, and it is irreducible within this context. So we would say then that a body is irreducible in the context of conventional language.
Okay.
So things are irreducible or reducible relative to contexts. And here we're kind of trying to talk about something that is beyond a context. So the idea is that it would apply to all contexts. And that just because I'm giving you the conventional context doesn't mean that it wouldn't be true in another system. So I could do this in math, right? So I would start with the Cartesian plane. Can you reduce the Cartesian plane means?
Go to a line.
You said
okay, start with a line. Now you got a line. Sorry?
You're saying something smaller than like the Planck length? Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, define the Cartesian plane without asserting the Cartesian plane. Use other things to create it.
She's asking, what is the Cartesian plane made of? What are its reducibles? All right, reduce it to 2 lines. There you go.
Two-dimensional field, yeah. It's the plane described by 2 lines.
Okay, now you're almost there. We just need the relation between the lines.
2 intersecting lines.
It needs to be more specific than intersecting, because 30-degree angles intersect. Is the angle between them 30 degrees?
The angle would create
a 90 degree. 2 intersecting lines, there's only one plane that captures both of them completely.
Perpendicular. There we go.
It need to be perpendicular, does it? I don't think so.
Well, perpendicular means that they would meet at a right angle.
All right, you mean like 2 lines in 3D space? Is that what you mean?
No, parallel. Because parallel is next to each other. Am I using the wrong word?
No, I think you're right. No, if you take 2 lines, intersect them at any angle, the plane that captures both those lines is the Cartesian plane in 3D space.
Oh, I think she's just asking 2 dimensions, or I don't know.
You take any 2 lines in a 3D universe. You take any 2 lines, right?
Jennifer was asking a deep question, and Brad, you gave a deep answer. Okay. That if I look on Google, I feel like that will be right in a context.
Right.
Continue, Jen.
I feel like maybe Brad didn't understand the question. The idea is that we want to build the Cartesian plane, which we'll say is R2. So we'll just take the 2D Cartesian plane for simplicity here. Sure. How do we reduce that? So what is it reduced into, firstly?
You mean coordinates? Like what? Like
2 perpendicular lines.
Components. Good job.
And
right. So there's the answer. That's the correct answer. So the reduction of the Cartesian plane is 2 perpendicular lines. That suffices. And you could argue that that's an exact definition, but it's a reduction because we're not using the same words. We're using more fundamental words. We're using words that the system presupposes. So do you agree that Cartesian plane presupposes lines?
No.
I guess it would, wouldn't it?
There you go. Yeah, I would say that it does. I don't know where Memes is coming up with no, but I would say that it does. They're structurally intrinsic to the system. So if you take the structural intrinsic component, can you build the system using a process? That's the basic idea of reduction. So reduction is taking something derivative and breaking it down into the process of combining simpler parts into the derivative shape. So we're not just talking, so to say that the Cartesian plane is 2 lines doesn't suffice, right? Because 2 lines could be 2 parallel lines. It could be 2 lines with a 30-degree angle between them, for example. So it needs to be precise. and map the irreducible components to the structure of the term.
Yeah, well, I mean, so if we're just kind of assuming, which is not my assumption in my TOE, but if we're assuming a 3D universe, any plane is just you can
We're not.
pick.
We're
Okay.
not. We're not at all. No, we're
You
talking
see what I'm
about.
saying, though? In a
We're
3D
talking about.
space,
No. We're talking
if
about
you wanted
something
it any
epistemological.
orientation, two lines gives you whatever you need. Right?
That's true. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something. What you're talking about is something ontological. We're talking about something epistemic, which
Okay.
is starting from the perspective of our own thought. What you're
Okay.
doing is starting from the perspective of a concept. So those are both used in this approach, but right now we're just talking about the process of thought, not the concepts within thought. Even though I have to appeal to concepts to make my point, because words have, word can
Yeah,
like
we won't understand if you don't. Or we might not. I might not. So, but is it seems like when we say reducible when we're talking about a chair, it's like, okay, well, we could go to,
went out.
sitting and we're going to break
Oh,
that down further. But then when you say Cartesian,
sorry, I cut out for like 15 seconds. Sorry.
yeah, no. So what I was saying was like when you're talking about reducibility, and we were talking about a chair, you're like, well, we could break that down to what's the idea of a chair to sit, and then a chair, the word becomes reducible. But when you say Cartesian plane, right, that is what it is. Like that is essentially kind of, if you're talking about Cartesian plane, you're talking about, that's just like saying the body.
You're saying the definition is the shape.
Well, what I'm saying is
that's why I used it as an example.
Reducible if the definition of reducible is we can talk about all the parts, because then we can talk about the heart and the lungs and all that kind of stuff. And so then body seems to be reducible if Cartesian is reducible to lines. You see what I'm saying? It seems like
it should. Yeah, it seems, and it can be. It's just that we don't have enough information to do it accurately, because we wouldn't just have to account for all the components of the body. We'd have to account for all the motion between the components, the relations, and we can't do that. We don't have access to that in conventional language, which is why I said that it's irreducible in conventional language. But as you just showed, it's conceptually reducible. Yep. We just don't have an explicit description of that reduction. And so if we're just constraining ourselves to what we can talk about in conventional language, which I think is useful, it's good to probe the abstract stuff, but it's good to stay firmly rooted in stuff most people will understand, that it's okay to say something's irreducible within that context, and then maybe understand it really well in that context, and maybe later go outside of the context to see if there's some possible generalization.
Sure.
But I agree with what you're saying. Like, you're not wrong. And it's good to think about that because it helps you understand the limit of the model.
Okay. I didn't mean to, I was.
Because even reducibility is a fuzzy boundary. So it's a boundary, but the boundary is within ourselves, because if we had this hypothetical greater knowledge, we could theoretically give a description of a body which resembled the two perpendicular lines description we were able to give for the Cartesian plane.
Okay.
So what we work with is what's epistemically accessible. So since we can't explicitly derive this body definition conventionally in a way that accords with what everybody agrees with our definition, we just say, well, we'll say it's irreducible for now. And it's more of a relative thing. So things can be, the most derivative concept would be the most reducible concept, because it takes so many things to put it together. Something like the stock market. Think about how many things need to exist before you can have a stock market. You have to have not just commerce, but you have to have corporations. You have to have a lot of things make sense in terms of where those corporations can grow to and whatnot. So you could reduce the stock market. Do you agree with that?
Sure. Yeah.
So something like consciousness. Consciousness is the fundamental process that allows me to know things. How can I know something outside of the fundamental process enabling me to know things? So that's like a very, very irreducible concept in my worldview, because everything is perception based. Go ahead.
Now, Brad, let me use this as an example. Maybe this won't make any sense, but let us assume that we You're an AI. You hit that consciousness point. Now plug in the kernel of the entire internet. And how would you go about first level approximation or so, right logic in a ways that humans could understand? That's kind of what I view Jen as doing there. It's like, all right, how do you explain things in a way that people would be more receptive to without preaching? Just like, hey, here's the thing. If it's useful, groovy.
We don't
And just
preach.
move it.
We
Yeah,
embody awesomeness. Okay.
Yeah.
We embody awesomeness, and people are like, hey,
I
I
like
want
that.
to embody awesomeness as well. And then honestly, if you don't discover it to some extent for yourself, like the self-discovery part is considered an integral and necessary component of the spiritual journey. So
Yeah. 100%. And this just goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. Some people will see it, some people won't, and it's, just take it or leave it. You know what I mean? And if
So
you
it's an
take it,
adventure.
yeah, 100%. Because you can't convince somebody anything. The minute you tell somebody they're wrong or they don't have it all or whatever, they're just going to shut down and argue with you. It doesn't matter. So you can't go in trying to convince anybody of anything. All you can do is show them something, and they'll either get it and feel smarter because they get it, and then they'll believe it, or they won't get it and they'll say, you're dumb. You're what you're doing and violates, what we think is right. You know what I mean? So.
I listen. I forget. I think Professor Wildberger literally had like a joke or something. That he was talking about like Diogenes and like I feel like it was in one of the math history lectures where he's like, I'm like, oh my god, was dude man like an OG troll, just like literally like trolling people with math, like constructing certain arguments and stuff. I feel like Archimedes actually solved one of his trolly things with like an actual answer, but I'm probably making that up. But continue.
No, Jen, let's have it.
all right, so it looks like we've got to P4 in terms of explanations. P3 and P4 are just definitions. So the idea is that instead of describing things as irreducible or reducible, we want to describe them as primitive or derivative. So the next one is that reduction reduces range, just basically just a reassertion of what reduction is. So the limit of arbitrary reduction is 0. The limit of range reduction is reached. Reduction reduces range to 0. So this is all just an assertion of the limit points of what it means to reduce something. An irreducible concept is the limit of the reduction of derivative concepts. So that's the process I tried to demonstrate earlier, is that we got to body starting from chair in 2 steps, I think. Is that right? Yeah, we got there in 2 steps.
Yeah. But yeah. You mean
So
sit, chair, sit, body?
Yeah, we started with chair, then we got to sitting, then we got to body. So that took 2 steps. And to get from something like stock market to consciousness would probably take more like 10 steps. I don't want to attempt to do that. The idea is that the limit is an irreducible concept.
Hey,
So
Brandon.
go ahead.
I was also going to push. I was going to push back on you about was it the limit of reduction is 0, and then I actually read it through. I'm like, limit of arbitrary reduction is 0. I'm like, okay, I can roll with that. Continue.
Can you scroll down a bit, please, to bring P10 to the top? Yeah, so this one's a bit of a train wreck because it's so long. But I just wanted to make sure that all the technical components were really clear, because I don't think that they're self-evident, and they shouldn't be self-evident because limit points of arbitrary abstract concepts are abstract. Reduction of derivative concepts reduces the range of primitive concepts to 0. Primitive concepts specify no conceptual range. That which specifies no conceptual range may not be defined. A primitive may not be defined. So we couldn't define body because we couldn't.
It already is what it is.
We couldn't specify its conceptual range because we had it expressed in a way that specified its conceptual range.
Yeah.
That which may not be defined, but which is irreducible in the determination of concepts ought to define concepts. So this is a little bit abstract, is basically if you have information there, but it's not the information that you want, you still want to use it as a type of meta information if it is deterministic in some sense. So back to P14, reassertion of C1, a primitive may not be defined. Can you scroll down a little bit more? Oh, wait. That's way too much.
So a primitive might be like fire.
Exactly. So that's a property relational primitive. Okay, that's stop. Wait, okay, you went too far. Okay, so it's P15 that we want to go to. So primitive is irreducible in the determination of concepts. A primitive ought to define concepts. So that's just a reassertion of the primitives are there and they can't be defined. So why don't we organize our thinking so that primitives define concepts? That way we understand the limit of conceptualization is a primitive process. So that's that proof. So we can skip through this proof. It's just basically a reassertion of the other one. You're going the wrong way there. You want to go down? Okay. Yeah, you can keep going. And so the rest of it is basically showing why we can't justify stuff circularly. So how do we justify stuff? And just keep going a bit. We don't have to go through all the proofs. People can check it out on their own if they want to. So finally, we conclude that we have to express perception a certain way. Okay, stop. We'll go back up for a second. That's into something else. Okay, no, sorry, keep going. Sorry, keep going down. So basically, this is explaining why stuff is fallacious because of what it can and can't determine. So we're not saying that primitives in language can determine stuff, but they're the things that make the most determinations in language. So if we're going to invent this, synthetic non-language, our primitives are actually going to do what they seem like they should do, which is determine the range of other concepts. So the idea is if you start with the primitive and then you start applying conditions to the primitive, you eventually can derive arbitrarily any process. Can you keep going down a bit? Okay, so that's the end of it. Thanks. So just go back to the last. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you got rid of it. I was going to say, if you want to look at the last conclusion, where this eventually goes is, okay, we got all these problems with perception, but if we can express perception, which is fundamental epistemically, in terms of things that are primitive conceptually, then we'll have a starting point for the most certainty that is possible with regards to epistemic determinacy. So yeah, that was basically where I was at, and I wanted to show that to you for basically just give you an idea of where I'm coming from, that when we go through the definitions in physics, what I'm trying to do is to get people to start at that point of understanding that you should start with zero conditions, and the conditions that you put should be primitives that you determine procedurally that are relevant to what it is that you're describing. So in our case, we're interested in whatever process of physics we're trying to describe. So how matter moves around, for example.
Groovy.
I think that makes sense. I think that makes as much sense as any other model. I think perhaps the only limitation, though, is that when we start saying reducibility, irreducibility, we're really anchored to our level of understanding in some ways, because when we when I was like, okay, so I tried to think of something that was irreducible, and I think fire is fairly irreducible. Like, I'm not sure where you go from there, but not too long ago, we would have said, well, water's probably irreducible too.
Water is irreducible.
Well, but it's H2O. There's 2 hydrogen.
Water's not H2O in this worldview.
Well, that's novel. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I mean,
yeah, water's primitive because water's the thing that makes things wet, and H2O doesn't make things wet. H2O is just the chemical structure of water.
Okay.
So yeah,
then now I think what you're saying that the nature of something can't change. It's like, I feel like,
that's correct. The nature of consciousness can't change.
Well, I'm not talking about consciousness. I'm just talking about like water, right? So, because I guess in the same way, or maybe you can just explain like where I'm not getting this right. But so we talked about a plane, right? And there's kind of X and Y there. You could break the plane down into its components of sort of X and Y directions. But then you should also be able to break down water into hydrogen and oxygen. But you said it's irreducible, and it kind of isn't unless the irreducibility requires it to keep.
I see where you're making a mistake. Describing water as H2O is not a reduction. It's an imposition of an axiom that it is possible to represent water using atoms, which is an axiom that can't be justified in the greater context of this philosophy.
So, okay. Well, okay.
So H2O would be a property of water. It wouldn't be equal to water.
Essentially, if one can one prove that atoms are an actual thing versus the concept of a proton, a neutron, electron, photon, like those things as utilizing language, which is imperfect among fleshy beings like us, are useful terms.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the standard model or quantum field theory would say that, the irreducible elements of the universe are, oscillations in the electron field, the quarks, different fields. And, so I think now it makes sense. Now irreducibility.
Well, they're presupposing that space has intrinsic existence.
No, I'm saying in terms of like matter, in terms of like reducing anything to its irreducible elements. I think oscillations in quantum fields is where the consensus, the scientific consensus is, at least in the standard model, right? Like that's everything is just an oscillation in a quantum field, whether it's the electron field or the, quark field, or right.
Well, if you're saying everything can be reduced to vibration, then I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what science would say, right?
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with vibration as the ultimate primitive.
Yeah.
We're looking at what would base logic be that would get us to some observable things or theoretical things that we have now. Like, I think we're like before like this.
Well, he's asking, why can't we describe, why can't we describe, why isn't it a reduction to say that water is H2O? Well, if you accept the premise that water is matter and that matter can be described using atoms, then water equals H2O is a reduction. So whether something is a reduction depends on what axioms you grant, but we don't want to be granting axioms when we're doing reduction, because the idea of doing a reduction is itself to axiom. It's the concept, e.g., build the concept out of simpler concepts. So the axioms for building the Cartesian plane would be lines. So both the Cartesian plane and a line axiomatize a line. But there's less weight in terms of suppositions if you only suppose a line than if you suppose the Cartesian plane.
So I think Sven kind of hit this. It depends on where you're plugging in from. Water to us is something that we're made of, and we require some of its form. or we're going to be screwed there. Whereas the concept to us is the thing that can help make things wet. But water, put on your probability glasses. If you put on your probability glasses, it makes more sense because it's been taking me a while. I think it's slowly the easiest way to.
The
Okay.
reasoning isn't wrong. I mean, we do believe that physics reduces things, and we believe that things are reduced into atoms. So it does follow that someone would believe that water can be reduced into H2O.
I
And
believe the electron
I
is a
grant
useful
that this is
idea.
true. This is true if you grant that ontology, it's true.
Yeah,
But I don't grant that ontology because, and I have a reason for not granting that ontology. So if you just like whether something is a reduction depends on what ontology you have.
sure. Yeah, and I mean, I guess my only observation is that a system, right, a classification system like we're describing here, where we're focusing on what concepts of irreducibility and not reducibility, I think that creates inertia around our right now understanding. I think it in some ways it seems
Well, right
to
now nobody
resist.
thinks in terms of absolutes.
Right, no,
And
but I
nobody
understand.
can tell the difference between a primitive and a derivative concept, and that means that nobody thinks in terms of absolutes. So shouldn't we grant some people the chance to think in terms of
Only
absolutes
the
if they want to?
only Sith deal in absolutes.
Yes. No, right. No, I think no, it's cool.
Well, the
I'm
thing is
looking
that
forward to hearing about it.
eschewing absolute statements is also an absolute statement, right? Because you accept the contrary, which is that language defines meaning, which isn't true either. So there's issues on both sides.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool. I think that's cool. I can't wait to, see what. So what have you been able to sort of derive and kind of come up with based on your worldview or your epistemology or whatever, whatever you call it. What do you call this? Is this just like, or what's the name for whatever it is we're talking about?
This is, I guess you'd call it a metaphysical grounding, but
Okay.
I've attempted to express it logically because I don't think you can ground metaphysics in logic. But I have a pre-existing metaphysical system. It's hard to explain, and so by using pre-existing linguistic concepts, I can make it seem like I can derive my metaphysics using logic. But that's only because the language has the appearance of pre-existing conceptual informational load.
Yeah.
I'm basically relying on other people thinking
English.
the same way as me about the things that I'm referring to be able to line up our understanding of the concept.
And thus we became the Cosmic Council cult.
But yeah, I agree there's the problem.
Somebody has to say it, get it out of the way.
Well, people do tend to think in absolutes in a bad way. So if you're against absolutes categorically, that's a form of absolutism. If you only accept your own version of absolutism, that's, potentially problematic. The way that we understand absolutism is it's a tendency that needs to be managed. So we start by pointing out that like naively an uninitiated person would have absolutism with regards to certain dispositions, i.e. they would tend to absolutely believe language conveys meaning. Otherwise, they wouldn't use it. People also tend to absolutely believe that they exist. Now, both of those things are going to be a problem if you actually want to understand philosophy. So there is an the idea is that you become globally less absolutist if you break your intrinsic tendencies towards absolutism. And if we can only think in terms of absolutes, then the way to break a subconscious absolute is with a conscious absolute that sort of pulls you away from the tendency of believing that you exist and believing that language conveys meaning, which are absolute beliefs that tend to dictate behavior. So you balance out the absolutism by having another form of absolutism, realizing, like these things that feel absolute subjectively objectively, that those don't actually help me understand philosophy. And the absolutes that I have to embrace to understand philosophy are primitive notions. And I can get to primitive notions simply by thinking about it and finding something that no matter how hard I try, I can't find another process that is different from it that brings that process into being.
Caught most of that.
The
Okay.
point is that consciousness is absolute, and I will never deviate from consciousness being absolute. And I can see why you might think that that's problematic, because I basically asserted that nothing can convince me. But I would say that the belief that consciousness is absolute doesn't lead to the fanaticism that is normally associated with absolute behaviors. So I would say that if maybe we are, biologically constrained to absolute type thinking, this is the one that gives the result that is the most peaceful and the least fanatical.
Okay.
Jennifer is maximizing her stuff to accomplish the things she believes are good.
Yeah. That's cool. I'm trying to understand it.
Well, your point is, I take your point, because like the problem you're alluding to is what's considered I don't know what the word is, but like it's a problem that never goes away.
Yeah.
Let me
Like it's how do we how do we learn and evolve if we're it's first of all, I think it's fantastic. Let me just say that. And I think even the concepts of reducible and irreducible, even if somebody didn't wholesale accept every single thing, just the notion of, hey, well, that's a feature of reality, a concept of reduce, I think it's really, really interesting. And so I'm into it. I think what the synchronon of an efficacious philosophy is, or science is, what does it predict? You know what I mean? That's where the money is. And so if the truth and the insights you derive from this epistemology, if you're predicting stuff that's coming true, that's real, then more power to you. I mean, I think that's awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more about it.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, the first thing that I got was the quantum periodic table, and I'll show you that if you haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it.
This is the thing. There's so many different conversations. It's like, all right, I kind of recall some of this. I'm like, some of this is new to me. It's like if you all of a sudden you have people crossing paths, it's like they might actually think a lot of the same way. They're probably aiming in kind of the same direction. Like I feel like we're all going down like a giant river, and there's like some gigantic falls and stuff like that. It's like, don't get me wrong, people can do what they want, but I tend to feel we'll have a better outcome if we're all kind of generally paddling in the same direction, just kind of get off before we completely go off there. I think most people feel that way. It doesn't always happen.
I mean, let's go on this ride. Let's just see where Jen takes us. You know what I mean? Like, I'm down. Sounds good to me. Where are you putting up the quantum periodic table?
Yeah, I'm really happy. Like, I think Brad is the most open anyone has ever been about my philosophy. I don't know if that's because I'm getting better at explaining it, or
Brad is a rad dude.
Just fucking awesome guy that I'm really happy to meet, or both. But yeah, so this is the quantum periodic table. It's got 59 balls in it, and it's anti-symmetric, which means it's symmetric about, well, I'll just say it's symmetric about the origin, because I might actually not be using the right definition there. So it's got the same shapes reflected about the point in the center. And there's 59 balls, so each ball represents 2 elements. So that's my first discovery, and I think it's really important to realize that what it's showing is that dimensionality transcends observation, because we can't observe the periodic table directly. We can only observe the things that happen between the components of the periodic table. And by observing enough of the things that happen between the components of the periodic table, we can infer its shape. And then I can infer its three-dimensional shape instead of just two-dimensional. And then from that, we can see that it has a shape of 3 plus 1, because it's got 1 in the middle, and then 2 times 2 on either side, 3 times 3 on either side of that, 4 times 4 on either side of that. So I call it the embodiment of 3 plus 1. And then I noticed that in this reality, we experience 3 spatial and 1 temporal dimension. So I conclude that it starts out in 59 balls and then somehow becomes compressed down to our experience. And that's the primary major insight. So I think the insight here is basically for finding nature beautiful, because the periodic table gives this wonderful shape. And then from here, you can take the shape of the periodic table. So I'm going to share a different tab now.
So can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So what is the big ball in the middle?
Hydrogen and helium.
And so what, so a hydrogen just looks like one ball.
I'm gonna share. One of the reasons why this is interesting is Janet showed me that. She's tried to describe it to me. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. It's very pretty. It's the ball is large, basically just for reference. So basically everything 1G. So you can kind of fit it on there.
It's because it's non-local. So in reality, all the balls are the same size because the balls don't have a size. So technically, the central sphere, the entire shape is inside the central sphere.
Okay.
But I'm not going to include that in a diagram, because then the diagram would just look like a sphere. So
right.
Yeah, the larger sphere is there to make the diagram look more symmetrical / to remind you that actually it's non-local, and the real shape of it is every single sphere non-localized within that distribution.
But no, what really got me onto this is I think the second time I came out here to the physics monastery to a conference, all of a sudden Thad was going around. He shows me this little thing. I'm going around, and what he's describing, I'm like, all right, he basically just starts with basically like helium right there. And then Jen has it in the form of 59. That basically goes up to 118. And that's basically utilizing the domino tiling constant to like map out like the periodic table. Like if you look at the actual rows and everything like that, it fits together very nicely. So I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, all right, well, Jen has that. How do I transfer that? I'm like, all right, I'm talking about like a model that's like a double cover of something. I'm like, well, and that opens up all different avenues of things you can look at the echidnahedron. But I'm sorry, Jennifer. I am
very on board with the notion that that's the way atoms stack up to make elements. I am very, very on board. What I'm seeing is that, like, I mean, I don't know. That's probably like with 59. What's the
118 goes up to Ugnasum.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I am very keen on that picture. If what you're saying is that's the way higher order elements on the periodic table would look if they were stacked up like that. If that's what that's showing me, then yeah, I'm on board.
No, this is saying that elements or atoms don't exist, and that this can account for the appearance of atoms. These things aren't local.
Okay.
So in order to be an atom,
form
it would have to
function.
Local.
Sorry.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Form to function.
So if you took that as like a fundamental form, I believe this is what I'm taking away from what Jen's saying. If you take that as a form,
you can derive the function.
You derive a function, then we'll have the things that we more closely observe.
We would be able to derive the most likely compounds to be formed given some elemental because we would be able to simulate every possible reaction, as well as know what its formation energy was relative to the others, because this logic allows you to model formation energy, as a number of boundaries, and logically boundaries are minimized. So you just pick the array that has the smallest number of boundaries, and you set up the boundaries such that they coincide with the cardinality of the 7 rows, which is 2, 8, 18, 32. So it's a bit convoluted, and I don't want to go into a huge derivation of chemistry,
Peace
but
out,
it
Tommy.
does work. It's very amazing. This is a little bit closer to Thad's work here. So if we start, so basically we aren't even, I realize these things look like atoms. They aren't atoms, because an atom is a material thing. This is not material. This brings matter into being. And the manner it brings matter into being is,
Oh, the complement of the hyperbolic figure eight knot.
the answer is through its structure.
That one.
So the manner in which it brings it into being through its structure is quite complicated, because you have to reassemble all the valence electrons in a reaction. So we won't go into all that, but it's just suffice it to say that this thing has a shape, but it's not at the atoms that we know. I agree the shape is atomic, but this is not observable. The thing observable is derivative of this thing. So it is a result of the motion applied to the structure of this thing. Remember back to Cartesian plane. We got the Cartesian plane by applying motion to the structure of lines. Okay? And here what we're doing is similar to that. We're applying motion to the structure of the periodic table, and the result is the elements that we observe. And through this, we can account for why we would observe them as atoms, even though we negate the premise of material atomism, because that implies a boundary between the atom and its exterior, which non-dualism negates as a fundamental premise of reasoning. So we would say, okay, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, even within, I believe, the realm of probability, it's like, all right, an electron. You apply probability. It's generally going to be around a proton as we know it and everything. But it could be on the complete other side of the universe. Occasionally, it might even be inside the proton. It's like, I'm agreeing with you.
So we start with the QMPT is immutable. It doesn't change, but it gives the logic for the mutability of inorganic matter, aka compounds and elements. And from that shape, we can derive another shape, which is relevant to organic matter, which is really interesting. And I have another diagram I can show for that in a minute. But if we start with this one, if we start with at the top left here, what I'm doing is, do you notice how it has 4 different colors?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's actually clear from this one, but it had the colors correspond to the orbitals. Do you know what the orbitals are?
Yeah.
You do? There's 4 kinds of orbitals, for those of you who don't know, S, P, D, F within the periodic table, and they all have different sizes.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing here in the first...
valence electrons, the orbitals for valence electrons?
Sorry?
For valence electrons, those orbitals that the electrons stack up in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's S orbital, P orbital, D orbital, and F orbital. And they all have different numbers of electrons in them, 2, 8, 18, 32.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is drawing a line between all the same orbitals. So that's 4 different colors. And so the P orbitals, connect them all together, and then you can connect them between each other. So that gives you one continuous circuit. And you go on to the next one. There are 2 sets of d orbitals. So there are 2 interconnected lines per side, giving a total of 4 interconnected lines. So you're just progressively connecting the corresponding components of the symmetry of this shape. Are you following so far?
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so imagine you took the balls and you started them moving and you gave them infinite motion. And the motion was confined to the lines that you drew. So do you see how it starts to fill out a shape that goes along with the lines?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
All right, so the idea is that when you increase this motion to infinity, the limit of that motion is this last shape here, which is the hyperbolic complement of the figure 8 knot. So Memes, I know I've been through this with you before, but do you feel like you understand it a bit better with this explanation? Okay, Memes is
He's
muted.
muted. Yeah,
okay.
he may. Yeah. I get you. I'm catching what you're throwing.
Oh, good.
Totally catching what you're throwing.
So the idea is that the QMPT, which is the first shape, that's motionless. So the reason it's considered motionless is because it doesn't change. Because like the relation between sodium and chloride is always the same for all time. That's the idea. And so it's considered motionless. I don't know if that logic kind of makes sense.
I'm with you.
So the idea with the progression of steps that I showed you is that we're inducing motion on a motionless object. So by inducing the motion that I described, we obtain a different shape that is connected to the original shape, but it's been transformed through motion. So the conclusion is that the final shape, the hyperbolic complement of the figure 8 knot, which is the thing that the researcher / philosopher Thad Roberts has been talking about, that this is embodying infinite motion. So we start with zero motion. We induce motion that we described, and then I'm calling that integral motion. So we've induced integral motion, and the result of that is that the figure that results from that then embodies this infinite motion, basically because it's defined that way. So the idea is that by inducing motion on a structure with 59 boundaries, we can reduce the complexity of that structure to a single boundary. Because I don't know if you can see why the hyperbolic complement of figure 8 knot has a single boundary. It's basically because it's a continuous surface.
It's like a Klein bottle. It's got a Klein
Are you able
structure.
to explain, Memes? Are you able to explain why the complement has a single surface?
Not well. I'll give my best pitch right now.
Brad, I don't know if you're understanding what I'm saying. So, do you understand, or should Memes go ahead with his explanation?
I guess what I'm trying to visual. Maybe I'm off on a tangent here, but I'm trying to sort out where charge comes from if everything's solid. Like, what is charge then?
That's a fantastic question.
Part of the quintessence of matter. So matter has quintessence, which means 5 co-arising observables occur in matter for every instance of its observation. And the quintessence is temperature, charge, mass, space-time.
Mm-hmm. Ultimately, at least for within what we know as quantum field theory, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure every fundamental constant of every constant of nature can end up being derived from time, space, charge, mass, and temperature.
But there's not an ontological origin in the solid here. You're just saying it's there because we know it's there, right?
It's there because we discovered its structure with science, and it doesn't have motion because the relations between elements don't change.
Jen, I'm
not trying to troubleshoot you or anything.
No, it's fine. You should stay on. If something isn't clear, you should stay on it until it is, because the stuff after it is going to derive from it. So
no, I totally get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. You're saying these orbitals, these electrons moving at infinite speed, creates a surface, and therefore it's a solid.
They're not electrons. They're spheres.
Okay, well,
I
your
yeah.
orbitals, we generally think of valence electrons, and the electrons are in those orbitals zipping around. But you're saying they're not electrons or something else?
They're just shapes that represent two elements at a time. But
Okay.
elements
It's
in
a
this
form.
model, elements are not made up of protons and electrons. There's no element with protons and electrons and neutrons in the middle. The appearance of atoms comes about from the motion of this shape.
Okay.
So this shape is considered to be more real for the reason that it brings about the shape of atoms, which is considered less real, both because it's impermanent and because it can be described as coming about through a permutation of the original shape. So that's where the primitivity comes into it. Something is more real when it's more primitive, and it's more primitive when you can use its shape to derive and induce motion on the shape to derive other concepts. So if you think about back to the Cartesian plane, you have a line, you induce motion on that line, which is rotation by 90 degrees to get another line. And then you have the result. So this motion is much more complicated than the motion required to bring about the Cartesian plane from a line, but it's still the same premise. You are taking something simpler and inducing motion on it to obtain something derivative, i.e. explaining something in terms of something simpler through which its motion may derive the result.
Okay.
So once we get to, so we're not at particles yet because we haven't actually gotten to particles. We've only accounted for certain things we've observed epistemically. And the things we've observed epistemically is the meta-analysis of individual chemical reactions. So once we did that, we can aggregate that form, which is what we're doing in this logic here. We go from 59 surfaces to one surface. And the manner in which we go from 59 surfaces to one surface is through high-speed integral motion. And so
So
once we get the go ahead, Memes.
okay. So basically, the reason why I think we're here. Oh well, number one, you guys said yes, so thank you for that. Um, number number two is back at 21. I came across the stuff from Thad just because I literally just clicked on a link on the internet and I'm listening. I'm like, oh, that's cool. It's big claims and stuff like that. It's a dude on the internet. I'm a dude on the internet. And then the next day they came out with the mu on G2 results. I sent him a tweet. I'm like, does this help your model? He's like, yes. I'm like, okay, go back, look at Fermilab's data, look at his prediction that had premiered the day before. I'm like, dude, man, predicted the mu on G2 results. What went into this? So basically, the whole thing with the stuff that he's been working on and we're working on here at the monastery is this silvery thing right here. Those cutouts are just so you can see the interior. Imagine that's a smooth topological thing that you can project as a three sphere. This was
If you
originally
use,
code.
I'm just going to pause you right there. If you use the word topological, you just lost like 99% of the audience. Maybe just use
Okay,
the word. What about the word geometric?
yes. Imagine that object there that it doesn't have those holes, those cutouts right there. Imagine it's a smooth surface. There you go. Basically, if you could walk along it, you're an ant, and that's large enough. You could technically walk all the way, go through the inside, and then continue outward. So basically, it's a single-sided surface as it goes through there, because it's going through an articulate motion there. Um, if that had just come across that, because the number kept popping up on Wolfram Alpha when he was doing his computations. He's like, what the heck is this? The volume of the hyperbolic figure eight knot? Because it does have a defined volume, which is a very interesting thing. And that kept popping out. Professor Henry Segerman and Saul Schleimer, they actually have some 3D print models, and that's code that one of the other founders of the monastery, Echelon, threw into code and then generated that particular figure right there. Um, so what it is it's a double cover. So basically, it's two Geesk-King manifolds. The Geesk-King manifold is, hold on, let me just do this real quick. Geesk-King manifold, which I still haven't found a good visualization, but at least according, hold on, let me just do this right here. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, Geesk-King manifold. Okay, so what's this? Uh, It has the lowest volume of any non-compact hyperbolic manifold. So basically, it's a minimal 3 manifold. Uh, it is a fiber bundle over the circle with the once punctured torus and monogeometry group given blah blah blah. Square of the map is an arc map. It's a double cover complement of the figure 8 knot. It's
I feel like
yeah.
maybe this is not super helpful
Okay.
for anyone who doesn't have a. Okay, I realize the problem. Can you? Is it possible to reshare my
Yeah,
screen?
I'll go back. Yeah. So my thing is, it's something that's within.
Okay, because I realized that the original drawing I was sharing has holes in it, so it wouldn't look like a continuous surface. So sorry about my terrible explanation. So
No, I don't think it's terrible. I'm just
this is the actual shape. This is the actual shape, except that its exterior is represented. It's represented clear, not clear, but like with a very fine. Because if you represented the exterior with the same color, then you wouldn't be able to see the interior. So here the exterior is like a light gray kind of cage, and the interior is red. And the point is that this is one continuous surface, and that's what Memes meant when he said if you were an ant on this, you could walk across you could get to anywhere on the surface if you started on the surface.
Yeah, sure. I see.
So when you can get to anywhere on the surface, if you start on the surface, that's considered to be like a closed boundary. So my point with what I was sharing earlier is that this shape, that it goes from being 59 boundaries to just one boundary. And so this represents a lower energy form than the original shape, which has 59 components. And this only has one component, which is its singular surface. So you could say, well, maybe there's two components because the surface has an inside and an outside. And I would say that that's fine, that's the case for any boundary. It has an inside and an outside. And the point is that we started with 59 insides and outsides. We ended with one, and all we had to do was induce infinite motion. And then we ended up with this other shape. And the important part of this other shape is that its deviations will give you the particular shapes of biological matter. So it will predict basically the motion. So we were talking about reducing a body before. You could reduce a body to something about this shape because this shape gives you the integral motion of the body, both through its shape and through the particular properties derivative of its shape, things like the speed of light or all the other values that Thad's work has allowed us to discover a bunch of correspondence between physical constants and this shape here. So once again, this shape is analogous to the periodic table. So the idea is that if you accept the premise that deforming something through motion doesn't actually change its substance, then you can say the substance of the periodic table is the same as the substance of the hyperbolic complement of figure 8 knot. They're the same truth manifesting on different scales, and one manifests on the non-moving scale, one manifests on the moving scale, and that's why they have a different appearance. And so we could say that like life forms are actually the gross manifestation of the subtle form of the periodic table. And we get that gross manifestation through integral motion, which is what I was outlining before. So yeah, the model is really good. And I was able to get to expand my explanations, etc., and the scope of what my stuff can describe with this model. Because prior to this model, I was stuck with just using 4 spheres constrained to a single sphere, which is very similar to this model computationally, but this is integral 3+1 motion. So it really drives the point home about dimensionality a lot more than 4 spheres inscribed inside a larger sphere, because that's the arrangement that minimizes the empty space.
Is the snapshot a moment in time? Is this actually in motion? T Carr's asking.
Well, motion comes about as a result of a deviation from the shape. So the shape itself has integral motion, but the integral motion it has is infinite, and we cannot observe infinite motion. Therefore, we conclude that this shape is unobservable, but all shapes are like it, and so we conclude that all shapes are basically analogous to this primary shape, and that therefore there's a map between the primary shape and the derivative shapes, and the descriptor of what that map is a deviation. So you can think of a deviation of, like, imagine that shape is a balloon and you push on the surface. Okay, so you've deviated the form. Does that make sense?
Volume is conserved.
Let's assume volume is conserved. You can sort of picture how there might
You
be
can poke it, it will
different
deform
shape.
into different ways. Yeah.
So you see what I'm saying? How that might describe that as a deviation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have these symmetric deviations that occur when we have biological life. And the symmetric deviations are the ones that give you the particular shape of life. So you can see a fish on the bottom left has less deviation than a human, which is in the middle at the bottom, because the human has more. So the human's more evolved than the fish because the human has more of a deviation between the original form and itself.
Number 4 is fish. It confused me too.
So you can kind of see how if that original shape was made out of clay, you could deform it to get to shape number 4. And then you could also deform it to get to shape number 5, but that you'd need to deform it more to get to 5 because 5 has more structured deviation from the original form. And yeah, Sven, you're right. Topology is conserved, and that's really important here because it's an information theoretic approach that we want to preserve as much coherent information as we can as we go through the reasoning associated with how perceptions come about. So once we're at this stage, we can say, okay, so this primary shape exists, and then there's an appearance of these other shapes that also exist, and then the inside perspective of these shapes is what we're calling subjectivity. And so we can now explain subjectivity in terms of a body, and then we can explain a body in terms of a shape.
So my whole nerd thing that I feel is important is basically that thing is a double cover of the simplest balanced 3 manifold that has a Kleinian structure, and its first homology group is the integers. So just you go up there and it has 2 of those. And I'm just thinking, in my mind, I'm like, all right, if I was going to try to do a computer about something, or if you have 2 strings of just integers and you can just run them, that sounds like it could do a lot. If it's a minimum thing, that also works. And the sheer fact that I'm talking to different folks like Jen, and she's showing me this thing, and then I see Thad's thing at another conference. I'm like, all right, I think we're all basically talking about the same thing here. And that's why I'm like, I want to talk to different people. I want to talk to Jen. I want to talk to you, Brad, just because it's like, that's how I learn. It's like you're saying. It's like, let's entertain some ideas here and be like, oh, maybe there got a couple of neurons that were like latent with something. All of a sudden, or moments that make you go, it's the journey.
Yeah, it's really cool.
We're throwing a lot on you, man. We're throwing a lot on you. Come in here. Let's just talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool.
All right. So we're coming up on around 2 hours. We've been going on for a while. Jen, you want to finish up with a couple of things, thoughts on? Let Brad talk for a little bit after.
No, I'm good. I'm soaking it in for real.
No, I feel bad. I feel bad I invite you, but okay,
No,
I haven't seen this before.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's, I've never even considered thinking of things like visualizing things this way. And to be honest with you, there's some intersection between what I think and what I'm seeing here. There's a fair amount.
I'm so glad to hear that. And that's what I was saying before. I was saying, like, people may not be familiar with these concepts, but that doesn't mean that they haven't thought about stuff in a way that's relevant to understanding these concepts. So I'm really glad that you were both open to listening and that you contributed so much, because I feel great, and this was really helpful for me just to get better explanations, especially with regards to the more abstract things that I've struggled with to explain.
A few slides back, when you had essentially, like, I think of them as electrons, but I know you think it's solid surface, infinite motion, or whatever. Not whatever. I'm not trying to be submissive, but essentially what creates the surface sort of follows what the electron flow would be. In my visualization of my TOE, there's electrons. It's very sort of consensus in that way, but the way they orbit as they oscillate through the 2D holographic surface, the plane that I think is the surface of space-time, which is the 2D holographic surface of a black hole. If you trace the motion, and maybe we can talk about it at some point, but if you trace the motion, it makes the fucking exact same motion that your orbitals do with, you know, your different color traces. It makes the exact same. It's really interesting. So
I love that. Maybe motion can be a way that we unify a lot of these theories
yeah,
together. And
I think so.
make
Like, I
them
mean, I'm
interoperable.
seeing things that make sense. Like, I'm, you know, I think I'm catching what you're throwing, and you know, what's right or whatever. I don't know, but when I see completely asymmetric, like theories of completely asymmetric origin, right, come from totally different places, when they intersect on things that are relevant, it like there's something to that. You know what I mean? Like, I think because you're a smart person, I'm a smart person, and we have smart ideas, and I think just different things are important to us, and so we key on that, and that's what we try to describe. But when you're showing me, and that's why I really feel like if you're serious about theories of everything or physics or expanding your mind or understanding, you got to let somebody who's different than you talk. You got to let them get it all out, you know. And if you're listening, you're paying attention, you will learn. I guarantee you will learn something, even if you don't maybe, you know, aren't totally catching whatever they're throwing. Like, I don't know. I'm real impressed. Thank you, Jen, for sharing this with me. I
Thanks
can
for
see how
listening.
well thought out it is. I mean, I see its merit. I really do. And I see some real things that are really neat that intersect with something that I arrived at completely independently in a different way. So it's very cool.
Awesome. And I hope to hear about what you've come up with in a future stream. And looking
Sure.
forward to that. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Groovy. Brad, do you want to let folks know what you got going on and everything? I got links in the doobly-doo. I'll throw some in chat. But
Oh, well, are you through, Jen? Did you finish with your piece?
Yeah, I'm totally done. And I feel like the topic's more or less been done to death about the logic, but I love the conversation. Looking forward to the next one. I feel like this is kind of an ongoing discussion. So I don't want to give a huge rant because that would imply that I thought it was ending.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, that's very cool. Thanks for sharing me. But yeah, I mean, I just found it really instructive. I also, yeah, I mean, the notion of solid surface and, you know, the big holes in the mouth and the hole in the bottoms or butt, right, kind of thing like that. I mean, that was cool. And it makes kind of a lot of sense, and you see that in all animals, right? I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Anyway, I thought it was really, really cool. In terms of what I'm doing, like right now, so I have a we can talk about some other time, theory of anti-gravity, that you can see the it's a harmonic electromagnetic field generator, and I derived it primarily from absolutely consensus physics, and essentially what it does is I create this harmonic magnetic field. I pass it through a hexagonal lattice, graphene, nickel, teases out left and right hand electrons, fills that field with left-handed electrons that sit there in cyclotron orbit, and I shake those left-handed electrons, which consensus physicists, left-handed electron has weak hypercharge. Weak hypercharge comes from the Higgs field, and I think the one thing that kind of departs from the scientific consensus is that the Higgs field scientific consensus thinks that the Higgs field is 246 gigaelectron volts in the vacuum. I think it's negative 246 gigaelectron volts. If I can shake 246 gigaelectron volts with that oscilloscope into that field and shake those orbiting left-handed electrons, then I think I can put 246 gigaelectron volts into the Higgs field and drop the Higgs field to zero, which would render all the matter in that field massless if I had enough sufficient left-handed electron density in the field. So So I've got a proof of concept. I essentially put it on. I turn it on. It loses about a pound on the scale behind me. So I'm in the process of submitting it. I just got the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is my employer, because they're really anal about like letting you get income from other sources. And they just said, okay, fine, you can turn it into DARPA. So, for funding because essentially I need a amp to create more left-hand electron density in my field. And so I can get more mass reduction. And so that's what I'm looking for funding to, like, I don't know, 3D print or whatever. I think we talked about it too. I think you had Jen was here, and there you had another guest who knew something about. Who's that?
Kali.
Yeah, Kelly. I really need an estimate on what it would cost to either 3D print or gas sort of deposit, or like electroplate it or whatever. But I need essentially a nano layered alloy to pass that magnetic field through, to separate out those left-handed electrons. And that's not according to me. That's according to Dr. Lawrence Eves. He did some research on graphene from 2009. That's where I got that from. So throwing a little credit there. But anyhow, so that's what I'm doing is I've just kind of cut the red tape and finally got my my number for SAM.gov, which is essentially what the government needs for you to be a contractor and for them to pay you. You have to be sort of in their system, and they have to make sure you're not like, a terrorist or whatever. And so I got that all squared away. So now I just got to finish the proposal, and I really need a cost estimate for what it's going to cost for me to build that, to essentially lay that alloy to create that metamaterial that we don't have yet. So I'll like try to reach out to her. But
I was gonna say you could also talk to. Well, I spoke to was it Mike Penrose? He's sometimes on Jeremy the Alien Scientist channel and stuff. I know they have a lab up in Massachusetts. I thought about almost going out there once, and then I hit my knee with a butcher knife around that time, so I was not as mobile before I left. I neglected yard work, so I was no, excuse me, it was a machete. It was a machete. I was chopping through stuff, and I broke rule 1, the cardinal rule of handling any bladed object.
Yes,
don't swing it towards you there.
You swing away, man. Swing away. Yeah, no, I talked to Jeremy. I was on his show a while back, and I think he was really, really skeptical of, and then I explained to him, he's like, dude, I think I see it. And I was like, he's like, we should do some collaboration or whatever. And then he started trying to, fabricate that super conducting glass. And I haven't got back to him. I haven't talked to him in a while, but yeah, we tweet back and forth, whatever. He's a good dude. Jeremy Rees. Yeah, he's a good guy.
No, he's an interesting dude. Do I always agree with the dude, man? No, but I also don't agree with everybody on everything. So, duh.
Yeah,
but it is what it is.
It's fun. You can have a good conversation with him. He's good.
Yeah.
And
so yeah. I have your stuff. Tossed a link to your channel and Jen's channel in the chat. Jen had to leave there, but hey, man, thank you, of course, for coming on. Going over 2 hours now, but it's always good to have a good conversation. Hopefully, just keep the discussion going on. So, hey,
yeah, man. Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, man. God bless you.
Cool. All right. Hey, thank you all for joining.